shall first introduce the speaker of the session, Dr. T.N. Nagbhushan. We are happy and proud to have with us Dr. T.N. Nagbhushan, one of the eminent administrator, researcher, and well-known outspoken personality. Dr. T.N. Nagbhushan is currently working as principal of S.J. College of Engineering, Mysuru, and Dean of JSS Science and Technology University, Mysuru. He obtained his ME in Electrical Engineering and PhD in Neural Computing, both from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore. He is having over 36 years of teaching, research, and industry experience. He also worked as a General Manager, Microtech Tel India, Mysuru, Engineering Manager at Aspire Communications Private Limited, Mysuru, Special Officer, VTU E-Learning Center, Mysuru, and Chief Executive Officer, JSS Research Foundation. His academic and administrative merits made him to shortlist in the final 3-member list for the position of Director of Indian Institute of Information Technology, IIIT, Dharwad in 2017. Professor Nagbhushan successfully guided 9 candidates towards doctoral degree and 70+ publications in reputed journals. Delivered several lectures in national and international conferences and workshops, including keynote addresses in many conferences. He is a reviewer of many journals and conferences of high reputation and working as a consultant to many industries. He was awarded Best Engineering Professional by International Biographical Centre, Cambridge, UK during 2010 and delivered convocation address at Oxford Engineering College, Trichy. He has organized 2 international conferences and worked as a general chair during 2015 and 2016. He served as a board member and technical expert in several advisory boards of both government and private agencies. Professor Nagbhushan is invited by several international universities or institutions to deliver lectures and for various assignments. A few of them are OCO Graduate School of Venture, Seoul, Korea, University Technology, Mauritius, Hannan University, Osaka, Japan, IEEE International Conference, ICICI, Singapore, Sun Microsystems, San Francisco, USA, Georgia Institute of Technology, Atlanta, USA, Mauritius Research Council, Mauritius, Durban University of Technology, Durban, South Africa, Nokia Corporation, Finland, Aalto University, Helsinki, Finland, St. Petersburg Electro-Technical University, Russia. Professor Nagbhushan is the key person responsible for establishing Multimedia Lab, established Nokia Lab, developed IoT and Big Data laboratories, built a good team of faculties and elevated the reputation of the institute, conducted ISTE or AICTE funded STPs, responsible for transmission of high quality live transmission lectures through EduSat, succeeded in live transmission of video lectures of Indo-US Relation Leadership Institute from Infosys Mysore campus for the whole nation through EduSat. He could secure grants to the tune of rupees 70 lakhs to generate 7 coordinate material under NMEICT MHRD project for VTU e-learning to develop course materials. He is responsible for developing a new technology for generating course materials which involve 3D animations with least storage. He was quoted to work in a specific range of cell phones during 2010. He is the first to develop the 3D animation rich course over mobile phones in 2010. Developed new laboratories such as CAD Lab, eYantra Lab, Nokia Microsoft Lab, set up training centers for NBA experts, evaluators, and created state-of-the-art gigabit media LAN across the campus, and the campus was made fully Wi-Fi to enable e-learning. Overall, it is needless to mention that the JSS Research Foundation witnessed vertical growth and accounted for a good number of research publications. His accomplishment at both academic, research, and administrative levels are innumerable, and the list goes on. He is very kind-hearted and accepted our invitation amidst his busy administrative schedule, and we wholeheartedly welcome Professor T.N. Nagbhushan to deliver a lecture on principles of neural network in this training program. I wholeheartedly welcome you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. During the next 60 minutes, I will be talking about the neural networks in a different way. Actually, most of you have read the textbooks, but I try to give the inputs, though it is very old one. Actually, it is not actually new neural networks. We started actually using neural networks in early 1986, 87. So when I was doing master's degree at IISc, we actually started learning neural networks and started coding during that time. Now a lot of time has gone in now, but still many people do not understand, and still people use it only as a black box. But as engineers, we need to understand the neural network from mathematical point of view. So therefore, I try to give a lot of importance to the understanding of neural networks from mathematics point of view, so that you can start really looking at the neural networks from different perspectives. And anyway, the neural networks are available in a much more enhanced versions. A lot of developments have taken place now, and during this era of pandemic, deep learning architectures and other neural network models are being extensively used. So a lot of time has gone in for the development of such architectures. So I was told that we need to give very elementary foundations to those people who are participating for the first time here in neural networks. So therefore, I try to give as much as possible in a very compact way, so that you should be able to understand the neural networks, which is slightly different from what actually you're seeing from textbooks. So my presentation, because the neural networks are fed by data. Dr. Guru has spent a lot of time in the morning giving you the foundations on features, feature extraction, feature selections, and so on. So those things are very important here. I also touch base with some of them and want to give that from linear algebra point of view. So therefore, you can ask questions related to that. So some foundations I want to tell you about the data, vectors, patterns from linear algebra perspective, because this is very important, because we need to take these input as a data to the neural network, and this data basically is a kind of a vector. And we need to really look at this most important thing, that everything that we are seeing is basically to be seen as set of points in space. So the input that we are giving, are the features that you are considering from wide varieties of problems, need to be seen as a set of points in that dimension space. So that gives you a lot of idea about the working of neural network architectures, why actually they are performing classification and so on. Then I need to start with a very basic perceptron. Its mathematical model, how actually the simple neuron has been developed, and how actually it has been used, and what kind of problems that it is going to solve. So concept of linear separability. Then comes actual limitations of perceptrons led to the development of multi-layer perceptrons with more hidden layers. And we need to spend time here on the mathematical foundations. So how actually this learning takes place, how the error propagation basically happens, and why actually it classifies the input data into different categories and so on. So this mathematical touch is important. And then comes another type of popular neural network, now not actually extensively used after deep learning. It's called radial basis function, and how actually this is seen as a curve fitting in a multidimensional space. And of course, we have these actually are taught under supervised learning. Under unsupervised learning, we have self-organizing maps, SOFM, developed by Tao Kohonen. The last part is I touch base with some basic data about the deep learning, because it is going to be discussed extensively tomorrow. Some applications. This is how actually it goes. Now the source of all these kind of neural computing and everything machine learning that we are talking about is basically inspired by the human brain. Now all of you know that some of these statements that I'm making, all of you are familiar with this, but it's kind of a recapitulation. So we are all humans, and therefore input to all of us basically is a kind of a continuous signal or analog signal. Example, the speech is a continuous signal over an interval of time, and even the image or the video that we are seeing basically is a continuous signal over an interval of time. So therefore all living beings basically operate on the continuous signal. So therefore there is a kind of variation of amplitude with respect to time. So that's the kind of a graph in 2D that you can see. This is a kind of an analog computer, human brain. And it uses continuous signals, as I told you. So sound, noise, speech, songs, etc., video. So these are all dynamic media, so time-dependent data. And so it's needless to say that all living beings like birds or animals and all these living beings basically use continuous signals for an interval of time. And they are being fed to the brain, and the brain receives these continuous signals and process the signals and act according to the requirements. Now we are trying to do something different here. Now how to really emulate the same kind of characteristics on a different continuous system? Like a digital computer, it cannot take continuous signal. Therefore, we need to go for discrete samples and then use the discrete samples for digitization. So continuous signals, the humans are extraordinarily capable of cleaning the unwanted contents received from the input space. That means, if a noise is there, if I am here, speaking now, if there is a fan noise, the human ear is capable of ignoring that noise and therefore take only the basic, signal, fundamental signal for processing. So this is something, extraordinary capability of the brain. So that means it is immune to noise. This is one of the important thing. And this important thing that we need to give to the neural network also. That means this should be able to remove the noise and also should be able to generalize. This is very important concept. So machine learning is synonymously used basically for neural computing, artificial neural networks. All these things have started in the beginning, and now that everyone talks about machine learning basically uses the approaches that are developed as an outgrowth of the algorithms and architectures on neural networks. So therefore machines could be any kind of device now, like your smartphones, and machine learning depends on the data that is fed into it. So that means what kind of data that we are going to give to the smartphones or any kind of device, determines the quality of the output. So therefore, the algorithms that are used to train these machine learning, devices, are very critical. So therefore, what kind of algorithms are used? And of course, all these algorithms are heavily based on mathematics. So therefore, mathematics is very, very important in all these cases. So machine learning deals with everything that attempts to make machines smarter and even intelligent. So when we talk about the machines, smart machines and intelligent machines, so make the machines solve problems in a way similar to the human brain. I don't say same, but in some approach it has to be similar. And machine understanding of text, audio, image, video, they're all open areas for advanced research. So how basically machine can understand the text, audio. So a lot of research is going on around the world. And now thanks to the deep learning architectures, which are quite capable of taking large amount of data and processing in a relatively short duration of time. So one of the important thing that even the AI, when people talk about AI-based machines, I don't really understand whether the AI-based machines are able to give reasoning for its decision that is taken, like a human brain. So for example, we learn certain paragraphs, a comprehension, a question is asked, then we will tell an answer. Then if there's a counter question that how did you arrive at it, we always give an answer to that. So that kind of a capability is called reasoning, and the neural networks cannot give any kind of reasoning. They simply take the input and gives the output based on the generalization capability, whatever it has learned. It gives a closest output, which is quite good enough for our management. So but reasoning is something which is missing, and that's an open area of research for all. Generation of clean data to be given to any machine learning algorithm itself is a vast area of research. This is what exactly Dr. Guru has really spoken about, the features and feature extraction, feature reduction. So much of volumes of work has really gone in because clean data need to be given in order to make the machine learn and even make it smarter. So the problem is that, because neural networks, if you see right now as a black box, you need to give the data. So what is this data? This data is basically the data that you are taking from your domain, problem domain. You are trying to solve a problem, and you should have the knowledge to extract the data from the given problem, and therefore such data need to be represented in appropriate form. So what is this data is all about? So before one apply machine learning algorithm to solve a problem, there is a need for sound understanding of the data representation that best describes the problem. So I use the word best describes the problem. So that means you can have infinite number of data samples possible for a given problem, but can you collect all of them? Or you can collect only some significant features from the vast data. So a lot of algorithms are discussed in the morning. So this is one of the important things. So data is basically the thing, but the features that we are talking from pattern recognition point of view. So when we want to classify certain things, we need to extract the features that best describes the given object. So how to get it? So this basically requires the user, to have a sound understanding, and he has the freedom to choose what kind of data that he wants. So how many features that you need to choose? So this basically it has got high impact on the learning capability and also efficiency of the architecture of the neural network that you are trying to use. One of the things is that, curse of dimensionality. So that means if we increase the dimension, if we increase the total number of patterns, how it is really going to increase the space? Because ultimately, when we want to perform certain classification to a given problem, so neural networks are best suited for classification initially. They can also be used for association, and also they can be used for optimization, and so many things are possible with neural networks. So to understand this in a very simple way, you want to classify the data into 2 classes or 3 classes, then it is possible that you need to consider that data and how many such data samples are possible, how many features that you can really take, is one of the important thing. Now let's take, for example, we want to classify the dogs. Now what are the features that we can take? For example, I always take the color of a dog and height of a dog. So there are, say, dozens of dogs available, and for each of the dog we take a color and also height. So we want to classify the dogs into different categories based on 2 categories. So what kind of species the dog belongs to. Now the 2 categories are not enough, so therefore I will go for a 3rd category. Suppose I measure the leg size also, another feature. So then I can also go for 4 parameters like color, height, leg, and eye color. So like this, you can keep on adding more and more prominent features that you really want to take. And these actually are measurable parameters. And therefore, with all these kind of parameters that you're accumulating, you want to classify the dogs into different categories. So this is a very simple problem and visible problem. So therefore, you can always do that. Okay, so therefore I give the name mathematically x1, x2, x3, xn up to xn, n number of features that you can always take for the category of dogs. So similarly, this can be applied to any kind of problem. So x1 to xn is n number of features that you can always measure, and how many such features that you want to measure determines, say, for example, n number of features. The challenge is now is to classify the cats and dogs in the world. So that means I have 2 categories. I measure the cat and dog by with these parameters, color, height, leg size, and eye color, etc., and want to classify them into 2 categories. So that means there are n number of features possible, but I will not be able to take all n number of features for these categories. And therefore, how to do this? Now the patterns that you want to represent here, use a very simple thing. Now if you take only one feature, for example, you take only one color. So that means I always use only one feature. So this one feature, you can see that you can represent this feature on a single line. Okay, suppose if I take 2 features, feature 1 and feature 2, it forms basically a plane on which this cat and dog are placed. So that means if you start searching from beginning, for example, here, and you want to identify whether a cat, dog, and so on, you can classify them into 2 categories. It is easy and less time consuming because you are bound to really identify them and so on and categorize them. So there's no problem. But when you actually increase the number of features to 2, so you can see that you need to start from line 1 and identify which category, go to line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5. So you have to exhaust all the space here. So the search space basically increases now here with 2 features. How about going for the next one now? So if you want to classify, you can see that this is how you are going to classify. That means when you search, this forms one class, this another class, another class. Okay. Now, suppose if you want to go for 3 number of features, for example, so that means I go for a kind of a cube here where you can see that the cats and dogs are placed with 3 important parameters like leg color, the height and so on. So that means this is how basically looks like conceptually. So with 3 features, actually, you see that automatically the entire space is now to be searched here. So you take the top of this cone. So this forms the first, plane. You go from one, etc., one line to next line and so on. So when you go for this selection here, you can see that the search space increases because in this cube you can see that there are number of planes which are stacked one by one. So plane 1, plane 2, plane 3, plane 4, like that. So on each plane you need to identify whether the cat exists or dog exists. Then only you can always form a region. So that means the search space now increases considerably, starting from 1 dimension to 2 dimension to 3 dimension. So you can see that in this picture the classification region is possible and search space basically increases. This is one of the important thing, that you cannot really take a large number of features, because when you increase that number of features, the search space also increases and the patterns becomes sparse. So that means the positioning of features in the pattern space need to be understood with highest clarity. This is very important. So even though neural networks in the beginning, in the early 1980s, people were not aware, they used to take all kind of data, all kind of features, try to feed them and say that my network is working better than that and so on. But with more and more knowledge actually getting into the field here, people started identifying that you need to have only good features. You need to have reduced features because you do not want large search space, which is time consuming. And second thing is that you need to pick up only significant features, which best describes the problem. So this is one of the important things that everyone should be able to understand in neural computing area. So a must for everyone. So the data having n features appear as a point in n dimensional space. So this is where I want to stress that the features that we are going to reduce from n dimension to discrete k dimension. So each feature, see, set of features, I use the word set of features, forms basically a vector. So a vector in n dimension space and a vector in k dimension space. K can be 2, 3, 4, etc. So that means when you reduce from n dimension to k dimension, the search space increases, and therefore the total number of samples that you want to take, even though if they are not many, you should be able to get a approximately better classification in accuracy. So the greatest challenge is to ensure how reduced features generate reverse mapping. So that means I reduce from n dimension to discrete 3 dimension, then I want to reverse it map. I should be able to really pinpoint into that. So how actually this can be done? Usually genetic algorithm does this kind of work. From binary coded genetic algorithm, we should be able to do this kind of reverse mapping. And for example, you take a brain image. So you take Alzheimer's disease. So you have the highest, you have the brain image, and you have the data, which is a very high dimensional data because of the white matter. So you need to have a feature reduction. So genetic algorithm can be used. You can use neural network for training. And once it is identified, you can always go back to reverse mapping also. So summary about this data is that data must be clearly defined for the problem and must capture the significant characteristics. Data has many features which decides the dimensionality. Number of data samples could be restricted or available in plenty, subjected to research topic. And each data sample is to be seen as a point in that dimension space. And all data samples are thus seen as points in that dimension space. And everything like text, audio, image, video can be represented as points in space. So this is the beauty. So neural network basically takes the input. Input is a vector, and vector is basically composed of numbers only. So that means whatever problem that you are trying to solve, it is basically you are feeding a vector as input, a set of vectors as input, and the algorithm learns and gives kind of an output. So what kind of data that you are giving? Some mathematical point of view, It is basically a number that I am feeding to the black box. So this vector that you are deriving from text, you are deriving from your audio signal, audio speech, or a music, or an image, or it can be sequence of frames constituting video. So that means I should be able to represent everything in the world with these, multimedia data. So some are static, some are dynamic here. The dynamic is audio and video are dynamic, and whereas text and image are static. So therefore, every problem that you are talking about, once you have the features, these features are nothing but vectors in the space, and these vectors obviously they are point in that dimension space. Therefore, the segregation of these points, depicts some kind of a behavior, statistical, dependency between one point to another point exists in that dimension space, for which these neural networks are amazingly best suited to understand the position of these points in that space through a learning. So this is something you need to really understand afresh. So there exists a wide variation in the way that data samples are acquired. And for example, face recognition, each facial image is taken as a matrix, and assuming that we can cascade all the rows, we have one single vector of the image which is a point in the dimension space. For example, if you take 1 megapixel camera, 1 megapixel resolution, and 1024 into 1024, so that means you can cascade each row 1024, next 1024, and so on. So one single, that large single dimension vector, it belongs to that dimension space, or 1024 into 1024 dimension space. It's a point actually. So if you take another image of the same person from different angle and so on, it is another point in that space. So that means person having similarity, the points basically lie very closer in the dimension space if the input features are not too different. Several such samples define the points at different positions in the vector space. So the vector space in this example define the space of vectors that represent the faces here in this case. So after ensuring that we have defined all the data samples as vectors in that space, the operations performed on the vectors inflict changes in the vector space. This is very important. Suppose if I take a 3D, so suppose I have A1, B1, and C1 as 3 points in the space, 3 operators in the space, and this becomes a point because A, B, C, if I take this as a set here, each one of them belongs to X, Y, and Z. So therefore it belongs to one point in the 3-dimensional space. Okay. So therefore I can always join this point with respect to the origin. So therefore it has a magnitude and direction. So this qualifies as a vector. So this incidentally, this also a feature for some kind of a problem. Only 3 features. Like for example, if you take iris, it has 4 iris data. It has 4 features. Now I take it off one data. I will take it off one feature, reducing it to only 3. So therefore, I can always represent it and plot all these 150 features of iris flower inside a cube, 3-dimensional cube, and see how the data points are scattered. Okay. So therefore, the operations that I am going to perform, for example, if that point is there, I can multiply that point by a scalar and push that point to some other, position in the same space. I can always take the data, and I can always, that data belonging to the one plane, I can always project that point into another plane in the same space for various operations. So that means whatever addition, multiplication, and whatever De Morgan's theorem that are applicable here, so will always be applicable to these vectors, and therefore the features that we can always play with the features in the space, which is going to really help us a lot actually in making the neural network understand better. So the data samples are often subjected to a lot of pre-processing before using them as input to machine learning algorithms. So this is what basically deduction and all these things are about. So algorithms to refine the raw data and pick the significant data, so is one of the important thing, and run through the dimension reduction process to ensure that data captured in lower dimension are more meaningful for the task. For recent research in this area, you can always do a Scopus search for the top 10 people who have been doing in this kind of work and high impact publications on data reductions, how to really obtain most significant features You always have n features, but which algorithm gives you the most significant feature and how many such features that are needed. So this is the main important task that one need to really, do before you start using any kind of neural network. So therefore, I am just, trying to establish the foundation that, when you want to use neural network, the people coming from, non-circuit branches, they don't really care about how the neural network architecture really works. But people in the electrical sciences division, computer science, and so on, they need to understand the working architecture, because these are the people who are going to build a newer algorithms, improved algorithms. And if there is a question that my neural network gave a better answer than the previous one, which is published in the research article, I should be able to give a reason why. But most of the theses don't give this kind of answers. If I don't give an answer why actually my algorithm gives a good result or improved result, then for which that I am asking for my PhD. So that's most important. So therefore, in order to do that, one need to know the top 10 people, at least 10 people who are working in this area, whose credible publications need to be compared with our work in order to make sure that we are also going in the right direction. So now the pattern space is the feature space. So for example, I take, Xi11, Xi12, Xi13, Xi1 is one single vector, this one matrix, one feature. So this is another feature. So like that, I have n number of features here. So each feature has each sample here. Say pattern 1, I call it as a pattern 1, n features, pattern 2, n features, and so on. Pattern n features. So for a typical problem, general problem, I have n features and n such samples. My job is to really use this to the neural network, a black box, and want to train it so that it can understand the internal representation and gives an output which is actually expected, which I'm also here in a supervised learning. So each row is a vector and has n features, and each column is also a vector and has n features. So this is how basically the entire, data need to be prepared and kept actually. So the input output vector for a typical problem. So I call it as mu as a problem pattern, pattern 1, mu1, pattern 2, mu2, and mu n is n such of n patterns. And each pattern has n features, Xi11, Xi12, Xi1n, Xi21, etc., Xi2n, etc., and Xin1 to Xin. So this is the input. And the output is basically kind of a class or a label that I am trying to do. So how many classes I have? I call zeta 1, zeta 2, zeta k. K can be 2, 3, 4, depending on the kind of problem that you are going to solve. So essentially, this data preparation is the initial task. You should be very, very clear about the data and how it is obtained, significant patterns, number of classes, and number of such patterns you need to really prepare. This is most important thing. You should have a good understanding about this for any given problem that you are going to solve. So this basically comes under supervised learning system, because you have the input data and also output data. So if you look into this now, the input data is a vector, the output is also a vector. So both input output are vectors. So pattern 1 comprises of input vector and output vector. Pattern 2 input vector and output vector of respective dimensions. Now, the input to the neural networks are static vectors in the input space, because they are static because they are derived from the features, and features don't change because you are fixing the features. So therefore, they are all static vectors in the space. One can plot these inputs in the respective spaces. Suppose you can always plot this and visualize how they look like in 2D and 3D. Okay, but in higher dimension you cannot do. You can do dimension reduction and see the scattering of these points actually in the 2D and 3D to understand whether there is some kind of statistical dependency among the pattern vectors or not. So that can also be done. So these points may belong to different classes, and there could be some kind of a overlap also. So this is another important thing. So these points which are distributed to the space may be linearly separable or non-linearly separable. This is something, in linear algebra, you need to understand linearly separable and non-linearly separable. Suppose if the points are there in the input data, and if the points basically are scattered, if you're able to separate them into two regions by a straight line, in case of 2D, in case of 3D by a plane, The plane is again made up of straight lines, okay, at the boundary. Or in a multidimensional plane, hyperplane separates this into two categories. So then the points are said to be linearly separable. So if the points are not linearly separable, means there is an overlap. So the classes are scattered and mixed together, then obviously you cannot use a single line to separate them into two categories and so on. So therefore they are non-linearly separable. So therefore the problems which are linearly separable are easy to solve, and problems which are non-linearly separable, it's difficult. So that is the one which actually put the neural computing, which picked up from 1960, to a complete halt till 1986 when Hinton and others discovered the famous multilayer perceptrons. So solutions to these classification problems attempt to solve to different boundaries so as to separate the inputs into different classes. So therefore the input-output vectors that when we plot here, so the points need to be linearly separable for a very quick convergence, easy and fastest. If the problems are not linearly separable, patterns are different, then you need to really look at more complex architectures, neural network architectures to solve such kind of problems. So any data arising out of image, text, voice, etc. are ultimately vectors in that defined space. And all operations on the vectors do inflict changes in the respective data in that dimension space. The learning process. Now we basically look at two types of learning, even though there are other kinds of learning like reinforcement learning. I won't touch all of them. I look into more common applications that most computer science people will be doing is supervised learning, and I also touch upon unsupervised learning. Okay, these are two different categories. So perceptrons were actually developed by McCullough and his student, Pitts, both of them from MIT. And multilayer perceptrons were discovered by Hinton, Sednowski from University of Toronto. Radial basis functions actually developed by Moody and Darkin in early 1980s. And Cohen's self-organizing feature map is exclusively only architecture available today on unsupervised learning. So now that we have Hinton and others basically are responsible for developing deep learning architecture, which is the current architecture now. Okay, so we need to really look at the mathematical way of looking at the supervised learning. How actually we can look at the mathematical perspective. So that means you have a black box, and whatever happens internally, I call it as phi. You are giving set of input vectors and want to get set of output vectors. For every input vector, you want to get an output vector. This is the philosophy of supervised learning. In a very simple way, in a layman's language, you give a vector. A vector can be n dimension or whatever dimension that you are already collected for the given problem. And now you have the output vector, labels are also known to you. You give the first vector and do some kind of learning. This phi does that kind of a job and produces an output. Gives the next vector, produces output, and give the next vector and so on. So this iterative process will continue. And this is what we call it as supervised learning. So that means I have xi mu. That means mu is equal to patterns. Pattern number 1, 1 to n. Mu is equal to 1 to n. And xi is an n-dimensional vector. So therefore, it belongs to n-dimensional real space. So that means whatever data that I have shown you, I have shown that as, xi is basically a vector, okay, in a n-dimensional real space. And there are such, 1 to n such vectors exist. And this basically phi is the mapping. And what I want is basically an output vector O mu that belongs to discrete k-dimensional space. The input pattern is n dimension and output data is k dimension. And this phi basically does kind of mapping. So that means you are mapping vectors from one dimension, okay, and to another dimension. It is not just a mapping, but it is basically a learning. So that means what you are trying to do is that you are trying to understand the position of these vectors in the space, okay, mu, and also you are trying to map them, projecting them from one dimension to another dimension. And in the meantime, you also understand where actually it is mapping. So this is something, very important. This phi is basically the neural network architecture that you are trying, and also the algorithm that really defines what actually this feed does. This is very important thing. So supervised learning is a very simple equation. Xi mu belonging to Rn maps through phi to an output O mu that belongs to discrete k-dimensional space Rk. Now this is the first mathematical model of a biological neuron, and in biological neuron I didn't really go for that. Let me just give you the input here. So suppose if I look into this discrete k-dimensional space. So you have the biological, most of you have seen it, just only for sake of clarity that I am writing here. So this axon, arborizations and so on. This another neuron that I am trying to write here, okay. And this point where these two touches is called the synaptic junction. So whenever the neuron basically fires, the signal flows and there is a chemical deposited. The strength of the chemical determines the weight actually that we are trying to do that. So that means this is neuron 1 input 1 and input 2, and therefore we have the weight that W is basically called synaptic weight W. So the Hebb's postulate, Donald Hebb actually told that he postulated that whenever the neuron fires, there is an increase in the strength of the chemical that attributes to learning. So it's also set of memory and also set of recall. So therefore, whenever we learn, the strength is increased. So this part is basically captured as a set of input x1, and this W is multiplied by this one to produce a required kind of an output. So therefore, the number of inputs are coming here, and the threshold is taken, passed through a nonlinear function, and the entire W keeps changing here because in a biological sense, the strength of the signal keeps increasing. And this is what basically is controlled in case of the McClelland-Pitts model of this neuron here. So the mathematical model for this neuron is a very simple one where the inputs are basically Xi1, Xi2, Xi3, 3 inputs. And this neuron is basically a summation, linear is kind of a summation here. The synaptic weights are called as Wj1 because this jth neuron, first input Wj1. This script is also very important here while writing program. And this Wj2 and Wj3 and Wjn, etc. So what it does is that it multiplies as the input Xi1 Wj1 plus Xi2 Wj2, etc. plus Xin Wjm. That's the input to this neuron. So that means it basically does a linear summation of the input, and it passes through a nonlinear activation function G, and it produces an output depending on this G. This G can be a threshold. If the total input is more than the threshold, this sends a signal 1. Otherwise, it sends a signal 0. A very simple idea captured from biological neurons. And this is basically termed as a perceptron. So a single perceptron consists of a very simple model where you have the inputs taken from your problem, and these W's are initially randomly selected, and you take the linear summation, pass through a nonlinear activation function, produce an output. If the output is not correct, again you make the changes in the W such that Wj1 is equal to Wj1 old plus delta Wj1. So some delta J is basically added to this. So like that, you're going to change this W until this Xi11, Xi2, Xin produces the required output. And this is basically the complete learning algorithm for a particular perceptron. So several such neurons were joined to form a single network, and this is called as a perceptron network. So here you have 6 inputs and 3 neurons. And what you can see here is that, you can see that the total input, this is 3 neurons and 6 input. So therefore every input here Xi1 is fed to all the 3 neurons. So every input is distributed to this, every input is distributed. This is a beauty. And now you can see O1, O2, O3. So these respective outputs. So if you have taken some n number of samples like this 6-dimension space points, and you're trying to map it to 3 dimension, if the patterns are linearly separable, then the perceptron learning algorithm converges in finite number of iterations. Now this perceptron network works exceedingly well, very well actually, if the patterns are linearly separable in the input space. Now this theta is actually an extra dimension here. I can call it as xi naught and call it, the weight actually is fixed as -1, and therefore every neuron, you can see that this theta is basically seen as a bias. Now one of the important thing that you need to understand here is that the input to this neuron is a summation of xi1 w11, okay, xi2 into w12, xi3 into w13, etc. What is this basically? This is basically an equation of a straight line. Okay, y is equal to mx, and this theta is basically bias, so that means it is of the form y is equal to mx minus c, plus minus y is equal to mx plus c, or y is equal to mx minus c. So that means I am changing this w, so that means I am giving each one of these inputs basically is treated as a line. Okay, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 lines are fed to this particular neuron. And these input, geometrical, you can see that, these 6 lines basically forms a convex hull in the input space. This convex hull can be closed or convex hull can be, open. Okay. So that means the changing of this W's basically and changing this theta changes the orientation, okay, of the convex hull in the input space. Incidentally, these convex hulls are arbitrary classification regions in the input space. So that means taking the Q into the linear algebra, the points which are scattered, okay, I am generating the boundary, okay, which are controlled by various straight lines. These straight lines basically are hyperplanes in a higher dimension space. So these these lines basically constitute hyperplanes, and these hyperplanes, develop the region between the patterns belonging to one class to patterns belonging to other respective classes. This is the beauty of the perceptron learning network, and also multi-layer perceptron and all supervised learning neural networks, that uses the optimization, quadratic optimization. Basically they perform these kind of operations. So what we understand here is that vector matrix multiplication. So if you go to the previous slide here, this entire thing is basically a vector, and this wjk is a matrix. So therefore I am multiplying the vector into matrix and producing another vector here. So net input a neuron is set of straight lines, they form convex hulls, and output neurons from an arbitrary classification boundary, and boundaries are found by the hyperplanes, and hyperplanes can classify only if the input patterns are linearly separable. Simple perceptrons can only solve linearly separable problems. So for example, you take very simple AND gate and OR gate, but it fails on XOR gate. It's a well-known theory in neural computing. So the multi-layer perceptrons actually were discovered because the patterns in all problems are not linearly separable in the input space. So therefore we have the patterns which are non-linearly separable. So it's usually most of the problems that we deal have patterns which are having overlapping of classes. Therefore you cannot really use straight lines and hyperplanes to classify very easily. It's very complex. So the neural network research came to a halt because Whitrow from MIT showed that in the XOR problem cannot be solved by this perceptron. So bringing the entire research into halt. So it took almost 16 to 20 years to develop an algorithm for a multi-layer perceptron. People knew that they can add one more layer of neuron, but they didn't understand how to develop an algorithm which will train the weight matrix such that the input can be mapped to the respective output, and also they should be able to classify the patterns which are non-linearly separable. So therefore combination of many hyperplanes enclose non-linearly separable patterns, and therefore generating complex nonlinear boundaries in the input space. This is the idea which actually developed by Rummel, Hart, Hinton, Williams and Sednowski in 1986, and is one of the seminal paper on error propagation in feed-forward neural networks in 1986. So the typical architecture of a multi-layer perceptron looks like this: input 1, input 2, and you have several layers here. So a typical problem, this act 150 neurons and 250 neurons in the hidden layer. Input layer is 150 dimension, output layer is 16, and so on. So this is another typical, the back propagation network here: input layer, hidden layer, and so on. And this is the I used to teach this in terms of all mathematics, like, the entire learning algorithm, can be understood in terms of all partial differential equations that you need to derive from input output. So I will show you some of them here. Okay, so you take for example, 3 input and 2 output with 4 hidden neurons for a typical multilayer perceptron. So I call it as Xi1, Xi2, Xi3 as the input, and these 4 neurons are arbitrarily selected. Output is only 2 neurons here, O1 and O2, and I call it as layer I, layer J, layer K for sake of clarity. And assume that I have n number of patterns, mu is equal to 1, 2, up to n. So if you look into this, the net input received by every neuron is multiplication of, the weight matrix WJK into Xi11, okay, and W Xi2 into W, JK W21, and Xi3 into W, 13, and so on. So this HK mu, this net input received by every neuron, K is equal to Xk, WJK into Xk. So this basically is a linear summation. So each neuron, okay, for every neuron, this is the input. And the output of this neuron is Vj mu. The output of this neuron is Vj mu. So when I pass this to a function g of Hk mu, I am going to get an output here. And then this Wij is the weight matrix, Wjk is the weight matrix here, initially random. And the output, the net input received by this Hi mu, is a linear summation of Wij into Vj mu. Vj mu is the output of this. The training pairs are Xi mu and zeta n. Okay, zeta x or k. So consider the net input received by each neuron, Hk mu. This is the net input received by every neuron. Okay. So this is nothing but Xi11, W1, as I told you, the equation of a straight line, Xi2, W21, and so on. So output of each neuron, Vj mu, is equal to g of Hk mu. So g is an activation function. So I can always substitute for Hk mu. You are going to get this. So net input received by this neuron, Hj mu, this again, net input is a vector matrix vector multiplication. This Vj mu I am substituting, it gets embedded. So the output is nothing but O is g of Hj mu ultimately. So if you substitute for all these things, you are going to get the output, which is actually, consisting of a function embedded inside another function. G is actually the function that we are taking. Now the output is basically, is to be compared with respect to the desired output. So zeta mu is known to me. The computed one is Y mu. So I take this as a quadratic error. I form a quadratic function and I want to minimize the quadratic function. This is the beauty. So if you look into the optimization of the optimization problems in engineering and technology, you see that this can be solved easily by a calculus based methods. So I want to minimize the error. So therefore I can use any calculus based methods can be used to solve this problem here. So putting all these equations inside this, the objective is that I want to minimize the error. So therefore I take the partial derivative, this error with respect to the Wij, first one which is embedded inside, and then equate it to 0 because I want to minimize this, and get Wij is equal to this. And this I call it as the entire thing after this. The beauty is that when you take this function, it becomes g dash, because when you differentiate with respect to the dependent variable, you are going to get g as a g dash. The beauty is that when you use an activation function, you cannot really, take this first order equation, differential equation. If you want to solve it, you need to go for either Newton-Raphson or any other numerical methods. But if you choose a function which gives the derivative by itself, okay, so that's the beauty. So this g is a sigmoidal activation function. And the beauty is that the g dash here, g dash is equal to g into 1 minus g. So when you differentiate and solve this problem, the g dash I put, this is missing here. So G dash is equal to G into 1 minus G. So directly you can substitute here without actually going for any numerical method. That's the beauty. And incidentally, this activation function is smooth and continuous. So therefore you can differentiate at a very close to every point here. That's the beauty. Okay. And therefore the Wij new is equal to Wij old plus delta Wij is the new update in the weight vector. Similarly, you need to update the weight vectors Wjk between hidden and input layer. By this approximation, you are going to get two important things. One is delta I mu, delta J mu. So these two are called error coefficients. So when we want to really compute the weights between hidden and other layers, so when I want to compute the weight here, Wij, so I give the input vector here, this is randomly selected Wjk, randomly selected Wij, and I get an output. If the error is not actually the one which I am expecting, then I compute Wij new is equal to Wij old plus delta Wij by this reverse pass. So this delta is propagated backwards now here, and delta, the Wjk new is equal to Wjk old plus delta Wjk. So therefore I have updated this weight matrix and this weight matrix. For every pattern that I am presenting, I calculate the error, I update this weight matrix here, and again present the pattern, check the error, update this weight matrix, this matrix, and so on. Friends, you can see that during the entire back and forth process, the forward pass and backward pass, forward pass and backward pass. Every time you are updating the entire elements of these two matrices. So you see the amount of computation that is taking place inside the machine. If the number of neurons are large, if the number of features that you are going to select are large here, so you need more number of neurons and more number of iterations. This is one of the important thing that you need to understand as a computer scientist, that the working of this particular neural network is not so easy that as a thing when you give it to the black box, but it does really lot of computational steps in between. Okay. And in the meantime, there are certain things that we need to understand. For example, the error that we are taking, for example, you are taking a three-dimensional input and three-dimensional output here. So O1, O2, O3. So you can see that there is a error surface generated here. So what we want is that if the patterns are linearly separable, the error surface is like a parabola. So that means you are going to start somewhere here in the entire U kind of a thing, and you start from initial error is very high. You come down by performing what is known as a gradient descent, because all these deltas are basically derived based on the computation of first derivative or the gradient. And I am making actually gradient go down, so therefore it performs gradient descent in the error space. So therefore the ultimate objective here is to really ensure that the error basically comes down. So let me just give you one more idea here. Suppose if this is the error surface. If the patterns are linearly separable, you start from initially this point here. You perform gradient descent here and perform, come down here. Check whether the error is 0. Again, come back. Again, check here whether the slope is 0. Take the slope. And you can see that the slope becomes 0 here, first derivative. So therefore, the point of convergence. But when the patterns are not linearly separable, and for example, if the error surface is something, like this, okay, is kind of a surface, you can see that if you are starting initially because you are randomly selecting the weight, you see that you are performing gradient descent, you get caught here. This is a local minima. And you need to push again to come back and ensure that, you come down here. Okay. So somewhere the error may be minimum, or the error may be minimum at this point of time here. Okay. So therefore, you can see that, the error, which is moving here, is highly nonlinear. You can see a lot of hills and valleys here. Ultimately, I want to touch upon only the value which is the global minimum. So therefore, till such a case, I will be performing gradient descent. So many non-linearly separable patterns have this kind of category. So therefore, we want to ensure that the weights are appropriately adjusted. And also we need to have certain mechanisms, improved mechanisms in the learning algorithm to ensure that the back propagation, takes the data input properly and try to understand in finite number of iterations. So the demerits of this multi-layer perceptrons is, it fits the hyperplanes in the output space, generate any kind of arbitrary classification regions made out of only straight lines. Okay. Then the number of neurons that make up the feed-forward network need to be fixed. This is one of the important thing. It's a heuristic, I guess. Demarcation boundaries is not smooth because the straight lines are used, and it takes long learning cycles depending on the number of features, which determines the input dimension and number of such patterns that you are going to feed, and the initialization of weight matrix. All these basically contribute to the convergence criteria of the multi-layer perceptron. Initially in 1986, when it was introduced, it used to take a lot of time even for small tiny problems. Now a lot of improvements were made. Several new parameters like momentum coefficient and learning rate, they were introduced, and even they also shown a dynamically constructing architecture called constructive feed forward neural network. Okay, by Scott Foreman and others. They invented that kind of an architecture in 1980 from Carnegie Mellon, and people use this back propagation for wide varieties of problems. Even though it was very, very problematic in terms of convergence, they used to take, I have seen in IAC for small moderate problems in 1990. So to run that problem, you use the powerful machines used to take 8 to 10 hours time. So I have seen that actually, right? So now that these problems are totally taken care, but the beauty is that in the learning algorithm, the architecture is, the beauty is the points are scattered in input space, and the hyperplanes basically are generated through learning architecture, learning algorithm, and automatically they obtain the classification regions in the input space. And most beautiful thing of this supervised learning algorithm is generalization. Even if some features which you have fed are distorted, still it is able to pinpoint to this specific class. That's the beauty. And this is the only neural network which has got that kind of a generalization capability, which resembles close to the working of the human brain. So convergence is not guaranteed. So applications are plenty here. So all these are applied for any kind of problem can be solved. So these are the problems people have attempted. Complexity, okay, Alzheimer, Parkinson, retinopathy, cancer cell detection, and so on. So now let us start actually looking into the radial basis function neural networks. This is another kind of a neural network, how it is different from the multi-layer perceptron. So I will try to give you some idea about this multi-layer perceptrons and also the difference between radial basis functions and multi-layer perceptrons. Okay. Now, if you look into the multi-layer perceptrons, MLP, if you look into MLP and RBF together, so there are two important things, that mathematically one should be able to understand here. Okay, so how these two basically goes one by one. This MLP basically gives hyperplanes, means the arbitrary regions are generated based on the straight line approximation in multi-dimensional space like this. So any kind of shapes. So therefore, the classification regions in the output, suppose if this is the input space, and if the output is to be differentiated like this, straight line, that these two are different classes here. So this is basically a straight line. Suppose if this is a three-dimensional space like this, okay, and suppose this is the cube, then the separating plane, is between this. This is the separating plane between these two regions. This is class 1, this is class 2. Now you can see that, the classification region is made up of straight lines. So therefore, in 2D and 3D, you can visualize, but in higher dimension, they are called as hyperplanes, basically. Hyperplanes. But this hyperplanes, because it has edges here, it is not a smooth actually transition in the input space. Suppose if the input pattern is something non-linear also like this, so there is a overlap, I should be able to do something like this very closely, that there should be some kind of smooth fitting. So in other words, I need to have some kind of curve fitting in the input space. The radial basis function basically does that kind of a job. It fits a surface, okay, in a three-dimensional space to classify the patterns into different categories. In case of 3D, it is a surface like, like you take a cloth and then pass the cloth like this and separating between the 2 regions or 3 regions and so on, depending on the number of classes. In higher dimension, it is basically viewed as fitting in a hypersurface. It is not called hyperplane. Rather, it is called as hypersurface in a multidimensional space. This is how basically it goes. Okay. So therefore, one of the important thing that we need to understand here is the fitting a multidimensional in a space by means of a curve. So this is one of the important traits of radial basis function neural networks. So what actually it makes different actually compared to the multi-layer perceptron is all about the way that we are looking the radial basis function, what kind of activation function that is used here, and how actually this is done. Now, in the beginning, I told you that the data representation in the input space is very, very important. So although we speak about the features and number of features, feature reduction, many algorithms that are available, etc., we spoke at length. Actually, Dr. Guru also introduced several ideas about the feature reduction and their importance, and also significant patterns. So even though research has contributed, the features are important because the original features which are taken from the given problem, they are the one actually which need to be considered for understanding. The reason is that in a human system, like the speech or the video or the image that we are taking directly from the nature, doesn't have any kind of pre-processing. It does take the input directly, okay, in the form of a signal, and the brain process this. So therefore, whatever we try to do with the neural network or even a digital computer machine is an approximation only, okay. So therefore, when we want to classify things, we should be as close as possible to the natural way. So in order to do that, the representation of data, in other words, the features that you are selecting, need to be, compact, need to be good, and you need to cover almost all good features. So the question is that all good features is a question mark even today, that what really it qualifies as a good feature, what it qualifies as a bad feature, is not really well defined even in the literature even today. Okay. So therefore the nature, we want to invent systems which are very close to nature, that, you should be able to take the raw input, both, in the form of a continuous signal, process it just like a human brain, and understand, interpret, and give reason. These are the kind of systems that are going to really, land up in the coming years. So in the research area, the radial basis function basically uses a Gaussian function. Okay, the typical function that we are using is a Gaussian function. So Gaussian function, all of you know, is a bell-shaped curve. So it has a width here. The width here is sigma. This is the width. And the center, I call it as, Wij as the center. So it has two important parameters, and it is characterized by e to the power of minus norm. The pattern that we are taking, x hat, okay, minus Wij, whatever we are taking, divided by 2 sigma j square. So this is the sigma is the width of the particular Gaussian function. This basically is the Euclidean norm. So x minus Wj. This is xj is basically the hat, is the center of the this Wj is the center, and this is the incoming pattern. So the incoming pattern in the input space. So radial basis function requires an understanding of the distribution of patterns in the input space. This is very important. Suppose if I take a three-dimensional space, for example, let us take this example. And here, this is a cube, three-dimensional space. And let's say that I have the points. These are all the vectors which are embedded there in the three-dimensional space. Okay. So these are the different patterns belonging to, say, one or two classes, whatever we wanted to classify. This is the input patterns. So the input patterns that we are generated for a given problem is represented as a scattered points actually in three-dimensional space. Now, these are the static vectors, they don't move. Okay. Now, what I want to do is that in the learning process, if I want to fit a surface such that the surface passes through each of these points belonging to different classes. So that means above this, for example, if I am trying to do that in a two class category problem, then this should have some kind of a surface such that this surface, the upper part of the surface belongs to one class and the lower surface belongs to another class. Okay. So this is something, you can see that, very closely, something like that. Okay. So the below basically belongs to one class, above belongs to another class. So this is a smooth surface that I am fitting here. So in order to do that, what we do is that we introduce, specific number of, say, for example, I use one RBF unit, another RBF unit, another RBF. So I introduce 4 RBF neurons here in the input space. Okay. And these RBF neurons are to be placed in such a way that they occupy at a centroid positions in the input space. That means they should identify cluster of points having common features. So for example, this is the initial position randomly selected, and I move it actually through iterative algorithm, move and move. Suppose this is the dense, portion. So these points belong into one that ultimately this is the RBF final position. So this RBF unit again moves in the input space through controlled algorithm. And suppose if this is the particular region, this moves and occupies this position. Similarly, this gets moved here and occupy this position. Similarly, this one may move and occupy. So initially they were at one position. They controlled the learning algorithm will push these neurons in the input space through a controlled algorithm such that it occupies the position in the input space such that this particular neuron represents the common features, the features having common statistical properties in the input space. This is basically called as motion of RBF units in the input space. This is very important. So you will not understand the geometry unless you really make up your mind that the problem that you are trying to solve has the input vectors derived, and these input vectors are points in the space, and neurons are also points in the space. But the learning algorithm in RBF unit requires the motion of RBF units. I call it RBF kernel space, and the learning algorithm move this in an appropriate way and position them at the optimal locations in the input space. This is the first part. Once this is actually identified, the locations are frozen, then this part is basically frozen. That means this x hat is the center, and let us call this x hat as the center, xj belonging to, that means this is x1, this is x2, this is x3, and this is x4. So that means they define the center. This wij is the incoming pattern, the patterns which are scattered here. So it computes the Euclidean norm between the center one and all the patterns, and also the related sigma, the width which is associated. This x1 is sigma 1 here, this is sigma 2, this is sigma 3, and this is sigma 4, like that. So I will be able to compute the output of a RBF unit. This is the incoming one. The output of RBF unit, I call it as Vj, is nothing but the output of this particular equation. Okay. So this is how I compute the output of RBF. This is multiplied by the weight, and this goes to classification. So what I want all the participants to understand here is that the input data, unlike in multi-layer perceptron, that doesn't really require any input representation. Rather, it takes the input, calculate the error, calculate the coefficients, and modify the weight vectors and so on. It does the job. That is called basically statistical optimization. Here, by doing so, what I am doing is that I am trying to fit a curve actually in the input space such that the neurons basically pass through, embed all the input points through the surface, and the surface basically serves as a boundary between the classification regions. This is the philosophy of radial basis functions. Okay, now let's go there. Now, radial basis functions, they generate a smooth boundary between the classes, work on the principles of curve fitting in a multidimensional space, no issues of local minima, and it has two important parameters: the center of the Gaussian and the width of the Gaussian. Learning requires correct positioning of RBF centers in the input space, just explained to you. The learning basically fixed hidden layer, so number of RBF neurons required, center and width need to be fixed. So here also, like a multi-layer perceptron, the number of neurons that are required to solve a given problem is arbitrarily chosen. We don't know the optimal value. So usually what they do is that they normally take the neurons in the input space in such a way that you choose a large number of neurons and try to reduce the size, okay, by shrinking it actually. So this part is called as pruning the neural network until the same kind of philosophy is required in the earlier version of RBF. You need to choose large number of RBF neurons for a given problem arbitrarily, and once convergence is achieved, you reduce the number of neurons and continue the training. So until you find an optimal set. Okay, update the weight vectors using delta rho. So exit once the error is threshold. So the data sets, comprises of some of them, you can try these things. These are all very primitive now, actually. In the beginning, these are the standard benchmark data sets taken from UCI, University of California, Irvine machine learning repository. Okay. Some of the experiments are done like that. It is a 3-layered network. You have an input layer, an output layer. Hidden layer comprises of RBF neurons. Okay, this is how it looks like actually, right? So you can see that the input is a vector, that is you are giving, or that means Xi1, Xi2, Xik, this is the input, and RBF unit, these are all RBF neurons, 1, 2, 3, etc., RBFN, and output is, O1 to OI. The beauty is that, there is no weight between the input and hidden, unlike in multilayer perceptron. So this is the main distinction between RBF and multilayer perceptron. But there is a weight only between the hidden and output here. So this RBF has a W, that means the width of the sigma and also the center. So this XJ and W, these are the two important things that you need to really do that. So initially random, and you have to use some kind of k-means clustering initially to position this RBF in the input space, just like I told you in the beginning, that once these positions centers are frozen, the parameters are fixed here. So that means this has got a center and a width, optimal center and a width, and so on for all the neurons that you have chosen. Now the learning now begins like this. Given input pattern, it directly goes, this is the vector only, this is the input vector. The center is also a vector of the same dimension, because the input patterns and the RBF both are actually in the same input space. They are lying in the input space. Okay. Now this basically computes the norm divided by the width. The output is Vj, and Vj is now multiplied by the weights here. This weight you need to initialize, and the output is calculated. And if the output is not actually the one that you're looking for, then you use the delta role to update only this weight matrix here, this W, JK, and give the same input pattern, complete, check the error and update these weights, and this process continues. So therefore, this way, the learning in a radial basis function neural network is distinct compared to the neural network designed by the multilayer perceptron. So this process is very, very prominent and became a very popular architecture compared to multilayer perceptron in the early 1990s. This is how I basically teach in the class and derive this. So this is the RBF network, 3 input and 3 hidden neurons and so on. So you select a training pattern and then compute the output Vj using this norm, and compute the output here, error. And once the error is computed, then you calculate the weight by using delta Wj using delta role, and update this weight matrix here. Okay. So this is how. So you can see that this is the Gaussian, is the kernel, is the activation function. And you can see that this box is basically comprising of data patterns as well as some of the neurons. So this is how basically the learning basically goes in the radial basis function neural networks. So incremental learning is one word basically, how to build a network such that it starts from a very small number of neurons and gradually increases the size based on the reduction of the error. So that means in the human brain, initially when the child is born, not all neurons are available and not all neurons are actually working optimally, right? So therefore, as the child grows, the neurons started acquiring the competency and develops autonomous capability. This is how the evolution basically happens in the brain, human brain. Likewise, initially you start with only 2 neurons and try to give the input-output mapping. If the error is not reduced, add 1 more neuron. So it becomes 3 neurons, RBF neurons, continue the training. So if the error doesn't really fall below a certain threshold, add the 4th neuron. And that's how basically you continue. This is one of the learning algorithms that were developed in the early 1980s. So it is called constructive learning neural networks. These are incremental learning neural networks. So it, first part basically computing the center of RBF neurons and computing the width and using the delta rule. So these two are actually given here. So initially how the training basically happens in the beginning. Okay. And one of the important, papers, which is very good actually, you can worth reading just to understand the dynamics is Plot, J-Plot. He developed a resource allocation network Fritzke, it's incremental learning in neural network, Chitra and others in IEEE transactions, and support vector machines. All these basically uses the similar kind of approaches. Now, fast learning. So I want to have a fast learning, optimal architecture, and automatically it should be able to generate its own architecture and better generalization. This is one of the PhD thesis of one of my students. Okay, so initially select two neurons in the input space. The input, frozen, output is frozen because of the patterns. And you present an input-output pair, calculate the network output and also error. So it calculates. Then update the delta role. Then based on the error, you change this, the centers of RBF units in an appropriate manner. So that means we didn't really, dissected this into two divisions, rather combined it into one single, approach. So first is you the input, calculate the output, and there is an error. And this error is used to cause motion of radial basis functions in the input space, the motion of RBF neurons, RBF kernels in the input space. And again, continue this. So that means you are trying to reduce the error. At the same time, you're also allowing the neurons to move and settle down. So this process will continue, and until such a stage that if the error doesn't really fall below certain threshold, then the time again add one more neuron in the input space and continue. So this process yielded a very good architecture. And these are all the equations that we have used. So the movement of centers and finding the best matching unit and weight updation, this process will continue. And you can see that, this graph shows that how basically the neurons are added with respect to epoch. One epoch is one scanning through the entire training set. For example, if you have 1,000 samples, 1,000 times presentation of a pattern, increases the epoch by 1. It's called one epoch. So as we move on, so you can see that the neurons are added, no neuron are added actually until this stage, then few neurons are added. And at this point here, when the number of neurons in approximately 35, the network converged. So it's starting from 2 neurons. Now we were able to reach the architecture, and amazingly, it worked very well for good, generalization and also fast learning. So this is about the radial basis function neural networks. Then the next part of this, journey is unsupervised learning. So what is this unsupervised learning is all about? In the unsupervised learning, you don't have the output here. In all the previous examples that we discussed, like a perceptron, multilayer perceptron, radial basis function, counter propagation network, support vector machines, all these things basically require input-output relationship. Okay. Now that, for example, you take the satellite image from the satellite, and that image is a multispectral image taken from different spectral frequencies, and you want to identify the water bodies, forestation, deforestation, okay, and also townships, water bodies, and so on. So how to really do that? So you can't really take the huge amount of data and then draw a curve here. It's not possible. So you need to have a larger accuracy, and therefore what is the solution? So in other words, you want to find a cluster in the given image. This cluster represents the boundary where it encompasses the data samples having common property, common statistical dependencies. Okay. So therefore, in order to do that, Tau Kohonen, he was a professor in Helsinki University of Science and Technology. He invented this algorithm called self-organizing feature map. Now, why actually the self-organizing feature map came? It came from the idea that how the neurons in the newly born baby develop autonomous capability depending on the input stimuli. So what does this mean? So a newly born baby, a one-day baby, obviously will not be able to recognize anyone actually, even the surroundings also. The one which is closest to that is the mother. It starts staring at the mother and becomes sensitive to the voice of the mother in the beginning. So that means the neurons which in the brain, in the outer cortex, which are dedicated for this particular activity, motor activity, or the vision, they become activated. Only few neurons in the beginning, right? So these neurons develop that autonomous capability and understand that, whenever there's a sound in this direction, it has to turn to that side. Whenever you call, by a clap, it listens to that. So that means the neurons, few neurons are there in the beginning which are sensitive,
And as the child develops more and more, inputs, somebody coming and calling, there's another kind of a music. Okay, when it sees something, more and more neurons becomes activated and remember those input features. This is how basically all of us have grown over the years. So the neurons at present now are sensitive to hundreds and millions of data there, input patterns. For example, 10 years ago we have seen somebody in an examination paper review, and today after 10 years I see, and somewhere I say that I have recognized you, I have seen you somewhere else. This is extraordinary capability of the human brain. Even that, with the distorted features, there is a recall. Okay, so that means the common properties, even though some features are distorted, there are other features which are dominant, helps you to really identify the class label. So therefore they belong to this particular group or particular category, can be easily understood by these kind of inputs. So therefore the neurons which are sensitive to that need to be identified, and these neurons are sensitive to a bunch of input data vectors. This is the philosophy. Now, if you are able to really do something, discover an algorithm on this, that you can identify the clusters directly, okay, without performing any k-means, etc., etc. Automatically can use a neural computing system in order to identify. I will give only the inputs, but it has to identify the clusters. Okay, this self-organizing feature map is one of the fascinating discoveries by Tau Kohonen. Okay, now in this case again, I just take an example of cube because it is easy for us to understand the. So bear with me for an approximate diagram here. Okay, so this is my input space, three-dimensional space, and in this input space I have. Okay, so I have one pattern, another pattern like this. These are my input pattern distributions. Okay, this is my input data, the only input data. I don't have any output. What I will do is that I will identify a grid here. I will form a grid according to Kohonen. Say, let's say, for example, this is my grid, a 3x3 grid. And each grid here represents one RBF neurons, one neuron here. Say, I won't call RBF, I will call neuron here. So these are my neurons. So I have 9 neurons here. Okay. And this is basically all the patterns here are xi, mu belonging to R3. So all these patterns, mu is equal to 1 to n. Okay, so that means mu is equal to 1 to n. So n number of patterns are here, and all these patterns belongs to three-dimensional space. These are all static vectors given to you. Now this neuron here, I want to place these neurons in the input space. What is the best way? The best way is that I can randomly select one of the patterns, and because it has got x, y, and z here, x1, y1, and z1, I can assign the same x1, y1, z1 here so that it overlaps here. Alternatively, I can also randomly select a number, okay, x1, y1, and z1 for this and assign this. In that case, what happens is that, say for example, this is the position of neuron 1. I randomly select RBF1. So this is my 1 neuron. Another neuron I randomly select, this is 2. This is 1. Say another neuron, this is 3. Another neuron, this is 4. Another neuron, this is 5. Another neuron, this is 6. These are all random selections. This is 7. This is 8. And lastly, this is 9. So this is the initial setup. So you can see that, the input patterns are also there. The neurons are also randomly generated in the input space. This is the first setup. Now the Kohonen's algorithm need to discover that, need to discover the clusters here. How many clusters are possible? So you can have all the patterns as distinct patterns in which n number of patterns is equal to n number of clusters. Okay, distinct, all are distinct. If there is some kind of commonality, then it can be n minus 1, n minus 2, or so on. Okay, so in this case, there are 9 neurons. 9 clusters are possible here. So maximum. So depending on the number of clusters that you want, you can initialize this grid. So therefore, what I do is that I take this as my Z, okay, mu is equal to 1 to n. I take the first pattern and then present it to all these neurons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So when I present it, what I do, I compute the Euclidean norm. Okay, Euclidean norm means distance between the RBF neuron 1 and pattern number 1, RBF neuron 1, pattern number 2, number 3, number 4, etc. So let's say that you have the the distance D1, D2, D3, all are computed. Say for example Dn. So that means for one neuron 1, with respect to all patterns, I compute the distance. And I have one distance which is very close to this neuron. Okay. So that neuron, I basically move this input, this neuron towards that particular pattern, the pattern which is closer to that. Okay. And also I will do that, I will identify the neurons through a neighborhood. So how many neurons are there within certain boundary? There is a formula. So those neurons which are in that, I try to shrink them by reducing them, by moving those patterns towards the input. All the neurons which are there, I try to shrink the width of this, the neuron, okay, by shrinking them. There is a specific formula. So same kind of philosophy happens for the neuron 2. For example, neuron 2 and pattern 1, neuron 2, pattern 2, etc. So for all the neurons, you compute the smallest distance, I call it as BMU, the best matching unit, and also shrink the neighborhood. So this way, at the end of all iterations, what you have is that neuron 1 will have certain patterns, neuron 2 will have certain patterns, neuron 3 will have certain patterns already identified. So it has learned all the input clusters, the clusters which will encompass only the patterns which are having common properties, right? So in this way, the input data is automatically generates the classification boundaries and it belongs. That the question is that an incoming pattern is there, is a new pattern. I fire this new pattern and give it to all neurons here. Okay, so that this is how basically testing. So I give this pattern to this. So one neuron which is having the smallest distance will fire. So that means this particular neuron, okay, fires, indicating that the class which is designed to this belongs to this particular class. So this particular neuron represents the class belonging to this particular category. Okay, and another pattern. So this pattern, you compute the distance, the one which is having lowest will always fire. So therefore, depending on this, we are able to identify each of these neurons in the grid, will identify the clusters in the input space, and therefore it is called unsupervised learning, because there is no supervision at all, and there is no error computation, and there is no way of actually computing any kind of quadratic optimization. Based only on the Euclidean distance and movement of RBF units, it is possible to obtain the clusters in the input space. This is only the algorithm available in the unsupervised neural network category. So it was actually published in 1990s, early 1990s. After that, there were some improvements in the research, in the sense that the Cohen's original network architecture wanted the total number of neurons to be frozen here, means how many clusters that you want. Okay, so in this case, what happened is the research went on to identify, why do we really want to initialize this grid, 9 neurons? I don't want to do that. I want to start with only two clusters. Then let us see that whether we can go for 2 clusters or 3 clusters and so on. So they actually started with a 2 x 2 grid. That means you have only 4 neurons in the beginning, and compute this process. The movement is continued, and if the total number of neurons within this boundary here, if they don't really converge, then you add one more row of neurons. So add one more row of neurons and then continue. So that means it is called a growing grid architecture. So this also does the same thing, but it's a growing architecture. That was the only way. And even today, the self-organizing feature maps are used for clustering many of the activities. Now let's turn to the algorithm now. Okay, so you can see that in this particular you have a grid, and this grid consists of 9 neurons. Okay, 9 by 3 plus 3 7, 9 by 7, 9 by 7 grid. Okay, so many neurons are there. You can see that x1, x2, x3 here are n features. N features. This is the input vector that you are giving. Okay, and you give the input vector, and this input vector, each of this input vector is received by every neuron. And you can see that the neurons are laterally connected. All these are connected laterally in the form of a grid. So this one neuron to another neuron, all these are connected totally. Okay, and you are trying to train this network such that even though it looks like a grid actually here, but philosophically I told you that in the cube these neurons are basically moved in the input space and they occupy the prominent positions. Okay, this is very important. So the firing neuron, for example, here this neuron fires, and this is the neighborhood one. This is the another neighborhood, and the entire thing here. So depending on the pattern, once this acquires that capability, each neuron basically remembers a set of inputs belonging to common property. So each of these 7 cross 9 neurons, represent a specific cluster data. Okay, and whenever a new data is given, that automatically identifies. Example again here. So many possibilities exist here. For example, there are many playback singers like S.P. Balasubramaniam, S. Janaki, and so on. So you collect the music samples of each one of them, and train them that the music samples, say 100 music samples taken from different musics of S. Janaki. They are trained, and one particular neuron is actually trained. 1 or 2 neurons with a similar kind of raga is trained. Then another set of 100 patterns belonging to S.P. Balasubramaniam, several other neurons are trained. So like that, you train all of them. Then any new movie picture and music is given here, random input, it should be able to identify the particular singer here. Okay, depending, it should just discover the statistical property commonness, with which the voice, some of the common features which are embedded there should be able to identify. Like that, the identification of such kind of clusters is possible through self-organizing feature map. This is another important thing. Not much research has gone in, and some of the applications are very, very interesting, especially in the space applications. So the algorithm is quite simple here. Initialize each node. So to random Wij initialize, select a input vector, then repeat this 4 and 5. So find the Euclidean norm. So track compute the best matching unit. So this BMU is computed, smallest distance, and I identify the topological neighbors using an equation, and this process is repeated. Okay, then shrink the neighborhood, and this process is repeated. This is a very simple algorithm. So the formulas which are used to compute is the initial positions of these neurons Wij at different iterations. P+1 is the new iteration, old iteration plus this the the error between the input and output. This causes the motion here, because this is the center of the RBF is xt. This is the input pattern that you are taking. The difference will give the error, multiplied by alpha, added to this will give the new value of the position of the neuron. So this is basically, this equation controls the motion of neurons in the input space until they occupy the optimal locations. So in other words, the weight vectors is moved closer towards the input vector. Another important element to note is that the updated weight will be proportional to the 2D distance between the nodes and the neighbor. This is the Euclidean norm. Furthermore, the same equation does not account for the influence of the learning being proportional to the distance a node is from the best matching unit. So this is how basically the neighborhood is shrink. So these are the two equations that we use in order to shrink the neighborhood. The learning rate sigma is calculated using this equation, and the neighborhood is shrinked using this particular equation. So applications are satellite images, and you can discover significant regions in a biological image. Okay, so this is how basically the unsupervised learning is all about. Now look into the deep learning. I think you are going to talk much about the deep learning, and this deep learning I will just introduce some of the things. Probably tomorrow's speaker will give more light on the actual working of a typical the deep learning architecture. So the passion for deep learning is basically the way that multi-layer perceptron works. Exactly, you have the same kind of hyperplane approximation, but you have many layers. Okay, you have an input layer decided by the dimension of the features that you are selecting from the input space. You have an output layer, which is the class label. These two things are known to you, just like a multi-layer perceptron. But in between, you need to have several layers, each layer containing some k number of neurons, K1, K2, K3, K4. These are all variables. So each layer is connected and input is given, and you continue the iteration until the output develops some kind of primitive structure identification, primitive feature identification, and that serves as an input to the next layer. Continue the iteration, the output serves as an input to the next layer, and so on. The arbitrary shapes that are generated at each layer ultimately gets joined together to generate the final classification regions in the deep learning. One of the beauty of this deep learning architecture is you don't need to really do any kind of feature reduction. So the one which you have been talking since morning, feature selection is problem dependent, and a lot of theses have gone in. Thousands of research articles are found. Even many people even now are also working on feature selection. But this deep learning doesn't require any kind of feature reduction. So you can give the raw input as it is. That's the best thing. And in order to make the deep learning robust, you need to give more number of samples. If the samples are very less, you will not be able to identify the proper the classification. It doesn't really give optimal performance. So if you look into the evolution here, in 1960s, perceptron was invented as a single neuron, as I mentioned. And Papert and Minsky, they proved that this perceptron doesn't really do well. So Minsky and Papert, both from MIT, they wrote a book called Perceptron, and even it's available free now. And they show that whatever neural network that people developed till then doesn't really classify a simple XR which contains non-linearly separable patterns, right? So therefore, this research halted. 70 to 80s, a lot of research went on. Only few people were working, and they invented a backpropagation algorithm, error propagation delta I and delta J, as I shown in the morning. So they invented the training for multiple layers of nonlinear features, leads to a resurgence of interest in the neural networks. So BP takes error from the output layer and propagates them back through the hidden layers to update the weights. So in 1990s, many researchers gave up on BP as it could not make effective use of multiple hidden layers. Even though felt that, it was mentioned in some of the research articles that a single hidden layer is quite good enough to solve most complicated problems. So that was the statement. Now, after that, when the data size is increased, this backpropagation, rendered, very, very suboptimal, became very slow actually. You can now watch that, the why actually BP is very slow, because for every pattern that you are presenting, the entire weight matrix, all the elements in the weight matrix, Wij and Wjk need to be updated. See, the computational speed, it becomes, most prevalent that time. So therefore, it became very slow. So I have seen actually running through 8 hours, 10 hours in a small typical data set, about 1,000 patterns and so on, of a moderate dimension. So the interest actually reduced. And in the mid 2000s, Hinton, so he's the one actually you would like to read all his papers. One of the paper is in Nature on deep learning. It's a good seminal paper. I recommend all of you to read this paper from Nature article. He wrote an article there, Geoffrey Hinton from University of Toronto. He's the one who actually invented the deep belief network, which you call deep architecture and so on. Stacking reduced Boltzmann machine. So Boltzmann machine was another neural network actually based on minimization of energy, and he called it as deep belief network, and ultimately it is trained layer by layer on an unlabeled data. So that means you don't have an output, just like unsupervised learning. So you have the input, you train them, produce an output, that output serves an input, and so on. It's called deep belief network. And use the backprop. So this is the same. The idea is that called backprop uses delta role because this delta I and delta J, whatever we have found through derivations in the morning, they are the prime factors even for deep learning architecture also. Okay. So therefore, this training is done in the same way as multi-layer perceptron. That means you are fitting the lines, generating the planes, generating the convex hulls, and these convex hulls basically generate arbitrary classification regions in the input space. In 2006, examined deep auto encoders as alternative to Boltzmann machines. And training deep networks was made computationally feasible by one of the things that, why actually this deep networks work pretty well today is question mark. And in this case, you see that even the deep learning architectures, has several layers and have the same drawback as the multi-layer perceptron. Like, because you don't have an output, you are only, giving the input and trying to train the network to all the weights to generate some arbitrary output shapes, outputs, and that output serves as input. So it's a continuous iterate process. Even you are updating the weights also there. This process will continue. But the invention of the GPUs, okay, the GPUs are actually invented by NVIDIA. So they are the most prominent people even today. And if you visit NVIDIA website, you'll get thousands of materials to understand where actually the computation is going on. Okay. Today, we are not actually measuring the speed of the machine in terms of, megaflops per second, but we are measuring in terms of teraflop per second, tera floating point operations per second. So that means so much of computational capability is there. Now we have in our lab a supercomputer which has a capability of 20 tera floating point operations per second. The fastest GPU in the world today is 200 pico floating point operations per second, 10 to the power of 12. That's the fastest GPU. So if we are able to use such kind of a GPU, now your normal even PC, you can always buy a GPU and adopt it and plug into your PC slot of your machine. It works amazingly well. So therefore we have faster CPUs, and to move from, we can use parallelly, and GPU computing is basically helping us to really compute the data at much faster speed. So neural networks are often represented as a matrix of weight vectors. GPUs are optimized for very fast multiplication. And NVIDIA, this CUDA library, all of you are maybe familiar. It is used for computing, okay? And deep learning and advancements, no refinement of data, feed data, whatever is natural. Deep learning has the capability to learn and adapt. And medical images are highly complex, rich in data, well suited to deep learning, very complex. And one thing which is a research area, I think Dr. Guru, if he is there, I would have told him that you should also look into, tell the participants here that AI, people talk about AI everywhere, even machine learning also they coined the word AI. But one of the important thing is AI has the capability, should have the capability for reasoning. If something is actually produced an output, then the machine should be able to give a reason why actually it is giving that kind of an output, similar to a human being. That capability is not found here now. Okay. So therefore, some people can start looking into combining machine learning. Want to give a touch means whatever data, whatever decision, whatever output you are getting, why you are getting that output and what factors that really makes it important and impressive in terms of efficiency, in terms of efficacy, that should be able to be reasoning. That reasoning is not there. But reasoning is the basic philosophy of artificial intelligence. Even natural intelligence basically requires reasoning. I will tell you a small story. There is a lawn, a big house is built. So in front of the lawn, a green lawn, a master used to sit in the morning and used to take a cup of coffee and has the habit of reading a newspaper in the early morning. This is the daily routine. So normally a routine newspaper man comes and throws the paper. He used to pick the paper and then start reading with a cup of coffee. So one fine day he felt that, okay, I'm fed up with that. I will use a dog. I will train a dog. So he bought a dog and then he trained the dog. So whenever the newspaper man comes and throws the paper, the dog used to bring the paper and used to give to the master. This is a routine thing. Then as the days passed, he felt that, okay, let the dog not be there. Why don't I go for a robot? So he bought a robot, a computer controlled robot, and this robot used to identify the location of the newspaper within the geography in which it is designed, pick the paper and hands out to the master. So one day, what happened is the robot also did not work and the dog also was not present. This entire scenario over a period of time was observed by a 1-year baby from the terrace. So when the paper was lying and there was no sign of a robot or the dog, this baby autonomously felt that it should went to the newspaper and brings it and put it in the table. Now the question is that, do you call the robot intelligent, the dog intelligent, or the baby intelligent? 3 scenarios to understand the distinction between the artificial intelligence and also natural intelligence. Now in the case of a dog, I have trained the dog, it's a smart dog. Okay. And in the case of robot, it is basically a computer. It is neither smart nor intelligent. It is just a slave. When the paper is outside the vicinity, it is not able to really do anything there, right? But the boy which acquired that input, the input scenarios, felt that it's autonomously able to really come back and then try to understand the location and try to give this. This boy, this basically this entire thing is triggered because of the reasoning capability. It understood that something is, the data is there in the brain, that all these are happening every day and it is not there today. So therefore the reasoning is that I should go and bring it and place it there. So intelligence requires on the data, on the knowledge that is already acquired, some kind of reasoning. Then this reasoning is basically directly related to thinking. Then what is thinking? I don't know what I am. What is thinking is very complex, phenomenon. But philosophers define from different perspective. But thinking, in my view, is a complex biological phenomenon. I don't know how I think, but I think on something, that something is my domain knowledge. See, something, if a person asks you a question in Japanese, obviously I cannot really touch it because I cannot really perform any thinking. I say that I don't know. If it is given in the same language, our own language, I will start thinking. Because whatever knowledge that I have acquired, that helps me to really link, understand the meaning and give some kind of an answer. So therefore, I'm able to think on something which is on my domain knowledge, but this thinking basically leads to intelligence. So therefore, if you look into the cone, okay, the data is unstructured. If you make it actually structured data, it becomes information, and information leads to knowledge, and knowledge ultimately leads to intelligence. So at the top of the cone, I basically sit on the intelligence, and this is what basically we need to really do about. So this AI is something very important. Not many people have attempted. It can understand speech, text, translate into different languages and so on. So these are all, different applications that you can think. I think, I have taken about exactly 1 hour now, given you some kind of glimpses in a very short interval of time in my own way. I hope that, it was informative to all of you. Then it's my time to really answer some of the questions coming from your side. Over to you, Dr. Pai and
Sir,
Dr. Sharmila.
Thank you, sir, for your very informative session. So we have one question, sir.
Please.
How is RNN different from CNN? When do we use which approach?
Recurrent neural networks have the lateral feedbacks actually. So recurrent neural networks are slightly different compared to that because there is a delay. Okay, that delayed response. It also looks into the past samples in order to feed the future. So therefore, recurrent neural networks are predominantly used for prediction applications. So there's a huge, I didn't really touch upon the neural. This counter CNN basically is, the philosophy of deep learning is embedded in CNN actually.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. So I, on behalf of Department of Computer Science and Engineering, feel privileged to wholeheartedly extend my gratitude of having Dr. T.N. Nagabhushan, sir, Principal and Dean, SJC Mysore, as a speaker of today's session. I'm sure the fine-grained neural network concepts by our eminent speaker would have given all the participants an exposure in materializing and understanding complicated topics in the simplest way. I'm sure that the participants have a lot of takeaway from the sessions. Thank you, sir, for a wonderful and highly informative session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.